Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first day of the Tata Steel 2021 Chess Tournament. This is a massively historic event held in Wijk aan Zee in the Netherlands. Top Grandmasters invited every single year, and a lot of other Grandmasters you might have not heard about. 14 players in total. Over-the-board live chess, not something we saw a lot of in 2020. And the time format is classical. The players get 100 minutes, and then 50 minutes added on the 40th move, and then 15 more minutes added on the 60th move. Can go for a very long time. So every round there are 7 games. I will select some fun and instructive ones. And today we are kicking off with Magnus Carlsen and Alireza Firouzja. Magnus began with d4, and after knight f6, c4, e6, we have a queen's gambit on the board with knight c3. Black can develop here in a variety of ways. Bishop to e7, classical bishop b4, c5, whatever. But Alireza chooses knight b to d7, bishop g5, h6, and rotates back with the bishop, and black continues developing. Now, here Magnus makes the first trade. He plays c takes d5, he has a lot of choices, and Alireza also has a choice, and he decides to take with the knight. Now, the bishops are open, so Magnus trades off, and here, rather than taking this way and transforming Alireza's pawn structure into a solid one like that, with the pawn controlling the central squares and disallowing Magnus to move his pawn forward, Magnus instead plays e4 and baits Alireza into this trade, transforming his own structure and maintaining a nice central control with 2 pawns. After castles bishop d3, Alireza doesn't like this very much, and he plays the move c5 immediately with his pawn and trades. Then he plays b6. The point of this is bishop to b7, he wants to develop. At this point, Magnus Carlsen has basically concluded his development. He's castled his king. What's next? You gotta move your queen and connect your rooks, or you have to go for the pawn that just moved for black with the move a4, bishop b7, a5. This is a very instructive idea. It's a nice example of how to use your pawn successfully in the middle game, and the reason why he does this is it activates his rook. He now has a target on a7. Maybe the rook will move over here in the future to attack the king, but more than anything else, it's the fact that he's also traded a very weak pawn. This pawn a couple of moves ago is an isolated pawn. It could be a target. So what Magnus does is he takes care of it right away, and he suffered no damages in the meantime. Alireza plays knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4. It's defended, rook to d8, and now Magnus goes queen a1, showing the flexibility of his position. The pawn is defended, and a7 is hit. Queen c7. Say, Levy, that doesn't guard this pawn at all. Well, it's not so clear, because if you play rook takes a7, takes, I almost trap your queen, and then your only move is this, and after this trade happens, black will play rook c8. And Alireza had calculated all of this. He did have a ton of time, and white cannot defend this pawn, because if you move the rook over to defend, you stop defending this, a concept called continuity. Remembering what you used to defend before you make a move, this would simply result in a trade of all the pieces, and Alireza is very happy about that. So obviously Magnus doesn't take. He plays a waiting move h3, a6, rook c5, and now plopping the queen into this very annoying square on f4. The queen is among the, like an imposter in Among Us, right? You can't kick it out because you would be weakening your position too much. You would lose this knight if you played the move g3. Now here Magnus plays rook e5, which is a ridiculous move, and it shows you this whole idea. It forces Alireza to kick the rook out, and now rook to a5, knight f6. So Magnus can repeat the position here. I hope that's clear. Just repeat move, shuffle back and forth, but he chooses not to do that. What's actually interesting about this position is Magnus can go here, because this knight, if it's taken, will result in the queen being trapped. The queen is literally just trapped. It cannot go to h5 because of Magnus's rook on the opposite side of the board, but Magnus chooses instead of g3 in this position to play the move d5, which on a surface level looks like it simply loses a pawn, but this is the point. E takes d5, e5, and it forces the knight to the center, and now the queen goes to d4. So what has Magnus accomplished in this sacrifice of a pawn? First of all, this pawn, even though it's an extra pawn for black, it is blocking black's bishop from being activated, it is blocking black's rook from being activated, and this mobilization allowed white to create a bind on the center of the board and improve his position. This is the influence of modern day strength of computers on chess. Computers oftentimes will sacrifice a pawn or two to get a bind like this on a position, and a few moves later, Magnus actually in this position wants to put his knight here, so he just gives away a pawn, another pawn. So Magnus is now 2 pawns down, and Alireza's got an outside pass pawn is what that's called, a pawn that just has an absolutely, clear path to the end, So it looks like Alireza is doing really well, but Magnus activates his knight, forces Alireza to retreat, kicks the knight out, forces the knight to retreat, and now activates the only rook that isn't really playing in the game, rook to b6, going here, because he understands the concept of time. If he sits around doing nothing, Alireza marches the a-pawn down the board using his pawn majority, and he's gonna win. But Magnus, every move he makes over the next 5-6 moves, e6, knight e5, every move he makes improves his position and creates threats. So queen back to f6, f3, knight back to g5, rook to b6, attacking the bishop. Now he plays queen e3, setting up an idea to maybe go f4, and this is weak in the future. So Alireza plays a4, but now Magnus plays knight g4. Queen goes to d8, and all of a sudden, it looks like everything is defended. And for example here, if you play a move like h4 to attack the knight, black has d4. Beautiful counter shot, defended by the queen. And the queen stops guarding the rook. So I meet a threat to my knight with a counter threat to your queen, which is why you should watch my video about danger levels. If you're new to this channel, you haven't seen that video yet, after this recap, go type in Gothamchess danger levels. You don't always need to address the threat if you can create a stronger one. And the queen is hit and the rook is lost. So Magnus says, I don't know, rook takes c6. I sacrifice my rook. Take. And Alireza has a very difficult situation because right now it is the 35th move of the game for black. It's very likely he's in very low time situation. Remember, I said you get the extra time only once you make it to the 40th move, and it's currently move 35. So Alireza spends a little bit of time here, plays a very natural move, bishop to f7, blocking, but Magnus Carlsen jumps in and sacrifices the knight to open up the position. Even though there is no check or nothing, there is no way for Alireza to defend his king. Bishop, queen, and rook are all staring. This rook is not, it hasn't moved. Queen goes to c7, and now a beautiful checkmate net by Magnus Carlsen. Check again, only move is to block, check. And Alireza resigns, because he only has two options. Queen g7, queen d6, queen g7, queen d6, king f7, and queen to e7, which is mate, because your rook is protecting, and king cannot go here because of the bishop. Or king f7, which leads to mate after bishop g6 check, king f6, bishop slides back to h5, or even the more pretty e5, king f5, and the brutal g4 mate. Every square around the king is monitored by somebody being taken away. The king is in a box and it is mate, and Magnus Carlsen strikes in the very first game of the tournament with an epic win versus Alireza Firouzja. And you know the crazy thing about this game is it's a computer breaker. Computer throughout this game is like black is fine, black is fine, black is fine, black is fine. Oh, maybe not. Maybe it wasn't so clear after all. So a very nice first round win for Magnus over Firouzja. And we will now take a look at Mr. Anish Giri's game versus Aryan Tari, who is the second highest rated player in Norway, I believe. Johan Sebastian Christensen is third, e4, e5, and a Berlin. So an anti-Berlin, which doesn't allow black to take on e4, bishop c5, trading bishop for knight. You do this and you've already rebuilt a little bit on your light squares. This pawn structure is doubled. But this game did not need any introduction, actually, because Aryan played bishop g4, and when he retreated back from this pin because he didn't want to trade, well, Giri chased him away. And now this position is very spicy. Black has a choice. Do you go here or sacrifice? And he sacrifices. And after bishop e3, offering a trade of one of black's attacking pieces, and it retreats, king g2. Previous game here was Hikaru versus Magnus Carlsen from earlier in 2020 when Hikaru played king h1. So king g2, f5. Obviously, Aryan's trying to open up the position, and Giri just brings his king casually to f3, but it's safe. And watch as the assault comes in with the pawns. He plays bishop c3 because g4 is not a threat. If you play g4, you know what the craziest thing is? I'm not gonna run. I'm gonna take. What? Check. I'm gonna run back. Check. I'm gonna run. Wait, how are you ever mating me? If you play rook g8, threatening mate in 1, I keep running. Queen here, I'm gonna keep running. I might even block. Maybe I block, and I do something called cocoon. You know, I just cocoon here, and I'm completely safe. So his preparation gets him his king to f3, and then he creates a blockade. You'll notice that Tari's pawns all end up on dark squares. So, Giri, with the help of his king and his rook, creates a light squared blockade of the pawns. He is up a knight for 2 pawns. And this is a super closed position. Black has 8 pawns, white only has 6 of them, but still has created a really difficult blockade to break through. In closed positions, you look for the squares for that extract maximum value for your pieces, and pawn breaks. Okay? Now, in this position, you'll notice that there's a lot of shuffling that begins to happen because Anish is looking for the optimal squares. This knight looking nice, but could be better there potentially. The bishop, beautiful on this square. He's looking at breaks, pawn break, d4, b4, maybe bishop back, c3, d4 somehow. And watch as the game goes on, both players shuffling, looking for a breakthrough spot. Queen e1, maybe you're going to sacrifice the knight. Maybe that's the idea. But obviously, there, you're kind of looking and prodding and poking, and Anish found a way to shuffle to the point where he got his queen to the optimal square. He decided that in all of this shuffling, it was actually his queen which should go first, and the queen ended up going into a6 and infiltrating. A nice little maneuver there. Queen a1, like this, and then queen to a6, and you'll notice that after bishop c1, bishop h6, queen a7, there's just no resistance. The problem is if black spends too much time monitoring the infiltration square this way, your e5 pawn will come under fire, or I'll play c3, d4. That's how I'm going to break into your position. Anish manages to infiltrate, queen c8, and now brings the queen as close as possible, and the queen sneaks around, and look who it's targeting. It's targeting the weak link in black's position, the only pawn that has limited defense. Bishop goes back to f8, and that bishop relinquishes control of f4. It leaves its post. What is worth more than a queen? You don't need to move your queen. Knight takes f4 check, and the game is over because if you take the knight, I have queen f6 check, king goes to h7, and rook takes h4, and you cannot stop me from mating you. You just cannot. You are completely overrun by the rook's queen, and the bishop. And so Tari resigned after knight takes f4 was played because there's nothing he can do. His only other move is to go here, and then I check you, and I can win your rook, or check you and defend it, and then win your rook, and the game is simply over. So a nice little bit of preparation there from Anish Giri, blockading in a closed position, finding a way to outmaneuver and infiltrate into his opponent's territory. But if he hadn't been able to do that, the key break for him would have been c3 and d4, and that is how you have to navigate close positions. Also, keep in mind that throughout this game, just one more instructive point, look how, before black even played the move c6, black has a dark squared bishop, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pawns on dark squares. That's terrible. That's not good. That will never work. And white, meanwhile, has a dark squared bishop, and every pawn is on a light square. That will work. That is good, because you cover up on the light squares, and your bishop can always now create targets in its sights. So a total like yin and yang game between these two, and a nice win for Anish, nice preparation, nice conversion. And for our last decisive game of the day, we go to an interesting matchup. Actually, if you're a newer chess fan, you might not know who these guys are. NILS GRANDELIUS, really strong player. I believe he's the #1 ranked Swedish player. So I'm gonna look this up like in the middle of this video. I should have done that before, but it's fine. You're with me here. NILS GRANDELIUS, and it's not close. He is 2660, the highest rated player in Sweden by a long shot, playing Alexander Donchenko, who sounds Russian, but he's actually a German player who is a last-minute replacement for Daniel Dubov because Dubov had to withdraw. Someone close to him tested positive for coronavirus, and just to take safety, Donchenko literally joined this tournament like a day ago. Literally a day ago. So, GRANDELIUS begins with an Italian, d3, a gioco piano, a little bit different than something we've seen before. Now, just a real funny point in this position. This position on move 6 has been reached like, I don't know, 8,000 times, many thousands of times. Rook e1 is like the 5th most popular move in this position, and then this position by move 11 has never been reached. So we go from 8,000 to 0 in the span of 4 moves, which means that it's either good and interesting for white, or it's bad. It's just, it's not, that's just it. If you go from 8,000 to 0, you've either done something interesting, and this might be a new way to play this position, or it's not considered the best, but it still gives, you know, some interesting chances. So what's happened here? Black has traded knight for white's light-squared bishop. White has a replacement of pawns, but, you know, white will have to play a move like you do a little bit later. Bishop e3, d5. You know, you want to decide whether or not you need to trade this bishop is kind of like the big question. So d4, he decides to play in the center. Black also, very rare, you see kind of like this pawn cube in the center of the board. Take. Now black takes this way, so both bishops are hanging. Take, 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 b4. Okay, so what's happened? We have a position where both sides have 2 rooks and 2 pieces, but it's bishops versus knights. Now, in positions like this, the other thing you look at is the pawn structure, and black is clearly worse. Black has doubled pawns, doubled isolated pawns, and an island here on h6. But black is saying, I don't care about that because I've got a bishop and I've got another bishop. Now, in situations where there are 2 bishops on the board, open space is nice. But beyond that, actual physical targets are even better. Ooh, almost knocked over my water. I'm so excited to do these recaps. Targets are better. And black's bishop here has no target. It can't hit anybody. And this bishop is only looking at 1 pawn. So what's going to happen? Rook d8, knight e4. Meanwhile, I do have a physical target. And what else? I can go knight c5. So now my knight is forcing black to make a very difficult decision. Do you make the trade bishop for knight? Black chooses to do it and plays f5, but again, it's a situation where black has 5 pawns on the same color as their bishop. So white plays knight d4, and a short while later is trying to play the move b4 to create this dark squared bind, because the light squared bishop for black has no role on the dark squares. So you get rook to a1, a5, rook a4. Look at this nice idea. Not allowing the pawn to move any closer, and doubling the pawns up to put pressure. Very instructive moment. Black plays rook d5. The rook now stops guarding this rook and hits this, so b4 is possible because you cannot take. Black is in trouble. Rook comes to a6, enabling this move, which would keep the rook protected but not protect this pawn from the knight. So white takes on e6, f e6, and rook a1. And black's in trouble. King e5, rook e1, and a short while later of some shuffling, white was able to win a pawn. However, black is activating their king. It's a rook endgame. It's rook in 6 versus rook in 5. If you haven't seen my rook endgames video, go check that out as well. Active pieces are important, but material is more important in endgames. So black plays rook a7. Rook d1 check, king h2, rook goes back to defend. Now I bring my rook back because I knew your king wanted to come here to take my pawns. This move would x-ray your king to your rook. So black plays rook d2 first. We have rook e1 check. King's got a difficult decision, but it decides to come closer. Rook e3 check first, forcing the king back to c4. And now rather than just taking your pawns and we just lose all of our pawns together, I play f4. Patience. Don't let you take. Keep this defended. Keep the pressure here. h5. And now the cherry on top. It's not my rook that's going to go hunt the pawns. It's my king. And it's like, uh-oh. Rook d3. I mean, for example, black can also play rook c2 going for the pawn with the rook, but then the king comes. And if you take on c3, I'm going to take, and king h5 and king b4. And it's not my king who's going to go for the pawns. It's my pawn who's going to go for the queen. So you need to balance this act of my king has to go hunt the pawns. I got to win all the pawns too. Wait a second, I don't have to win all the pawns. I could just push. It's not Pac-Man. I don't gotta go around the whole board. I can go to a point, then g4, g5, g6, g7 does the rest. And while black is busy taking all my pawns, my 1 pawn here on c5 is preventing the pawn from moving forward. My f pawn, which I moved here, is preventing black from moving forward. Nice game by NILS GRANDELIUS, and he manages to trade king h4, king e3, g3, patience. And then the second the king comes back, you don't go for this. You trade, take, king e3, and king g5. And black resigns because after king to e4, king f6, now we are hunting the pawns. Take. This is impossible to survive because king d6, king d3, king c7, king c3, king b7, king b4, and king c6. And 1 pawn seals the deal. And that's it. This king will never get back here. And by the way, you know what the most amazing thing is? Let's say I want to edit this position. You cannot do this in chess tournaments, but let's say you want to edit this position. Even if it was whites to move here, it's still a win. You could put the king on the best looking square. It does not matter because of the way king and pawn endgames work. 3 plugs in 1 video. If you don't know king and pawn endgames, watch the king and pawn endgames video. But that is the conclusion of your first day of interesting games here in Tata Steel. And last but not least, I mean, I promised you that we would, we would take a look at the standings, or the results. Magnus defeats Alireza. Giri defeats Tari, and NILS Grandelius defeats Alexander Donchenko. Here are some of the other players. Fabiano Caruana drew against Jordan van Forest, who's the second-ranked player in the Netherlands, very talented junior player, like 21, 22 years of age. Radoslav Wojtaszek, the strongest player in Poland. The second strongest player in Poland. The first strongest player in Poland is here as well. Jan Krzysztof Duda made a draw against Andrei Yesipenko, strong Russian player. Let me centralize this. We don't edit these things, we just do them on the fly. And Pantala Harikrishna, Indian Grandmaster, number 2 ranked player in India, drawing against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, rank 5 player in the world, and number 1 in France. So I will be making these recap videos throughout the event. This event is very long. All these players got to play each other. If there's any questions, leave them in the comments below. That's basically it for the first day. Welcome back to Classical Chess, ladies and gentlemen. It is good to see Magnus Carlsen back in top form, melting competition away. Let me know your early predictions for the top 3 finishers in this year's edition of Tata Steel.